It's week 11. We're dealing with a ton of injuries. We've got 4 more teams on a bye. And worst of all, the pickings on the waiver wire this week, frankly, they suck. However, I didn't think anything could look as nearly as bad as the waiver wire this week until I checked Brian Hoyer's stat line against the Miami Dolphins. What's up, Headliner Nation? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners. Kyle coming to you with Week 11 waiver wire targets. And like I said in the opening, there aren't a lot to choose from this week. There's a few guys that we're going to target and take a look at. However, it is slim pickings. We're going to make this episode short and sweet. We're going to get to a few guys that I really want to take a look at this week, a couple of emergency options, and we'll go from there and get you ready for a playoff run here in a couple of weeks. Real quick before we get started, if you didn't tune in to the Fantasy Headliners live this weekend, I issued a challenge to Headliner Nation. If we can get to 10,000 supporters on Patreon by the end of the season, I am going to tattoo Tight End Whisperer on my right butt cheek. That's right, Headliner Nation. For as little as $1 a month over on Patreon, if we get 10,000 of you lovely people to sign up, I'm going to tattoo Tight End Whisperer on my right butt cheek. $1 a month is all it takes to get us there by the end of the season. And if you do sign up on Patreon for $1, we're going to send you a personalized background for your phone that says that you are a member of the exclusive Headliner Nation. And you can show that off to your friends and family for supporting the channel. Now, without further ado, let's jump into it. Waiver wire targets for Week 11. All right, real quick, we're going to talk about some quarterbacks that we could stream for Week 11 if you have any injuries or if you're missing anyone from the bye. So a few guys that I want to take a look at, but quite honestly, there is only one name that I'm locked on to this week. If you need help at quarterback this week, Derek Carr is going to be the guy to get you through that. Cincinnati is going to be his opponent this week, giving up the third most fantasy points per game. And Carr has not played bad at all. He's been a very reliable fantasy quarterback all season long. So he's not a guy that's going to give you a ton of upside. He's not going to score you 30-something points. However, he's going to do just enough. He's not going to blow this game against Cincinnati. It's not going to be an awful start. He's going to do just enough. He's going to get you points. Josh Jacobs will probably see a ton of him. But again, he's a guy that's not going to win you or lose you this week, but he's a guy that will get you through this week, and that's what we need right now. Because the other options are not nearly as good when we're looking at guys that are under 50% owned across the board in fantasy leagues. We have Kyle Allen against Atlanta. Atlanta's giving up the 4th most fantasy points per game. However, they're coming off a game in which they just took care of Drew Brees and company, and they looked really good with the pass rush. Don't know if I want to trust Kyle Allen in that situation. Mason Rudolph against Cleveland. Cleveland's giving up the 10th most fantasy points per game. I would like this matchup a little bit better than Kyle Allen, so I wouldn't mind going with Mason Rudolph here if you desperately, again, need somebody this week. However, Mason Rudolph is a guy that I don't think that gives you any type of ceiling. Derek Carr gives you a little bit of a ceiling, I think. Mason Rudolph doesn't. He'll give you a floor. He'll get you 15 points maybe, but he's not a guy that's going to, again, win you the week, and he's not going to give you any upside. Derek Carr is probably not going to win you the week, but he gives you a little bit of a ceiling and honestly could get a little bit higher than what Mason Rudolph would. And then finally with Sam Darnold, he gets Washington. The one thing with this game is that if this is a little bit of a sloppy game, Dwayne Haskins is starting on the other side of the ball. If it's a sloppy game, New York can't really put the game away, then Darnold will continue to pass it. But again, I don't love this game either. Derek Carr is really the only streaming option I'm looking at this week in terms of trying to get through. So hopefully you have a backup quarterback. Hopefully you have a waiver wire priority that will allow you to get Carr. But most importantly, hopefully you just have a healthy starting quarterback that you can put in, because this week it's going to be a tough one to get through. All right, for running backs, we'll dig a little bit deeper because we have a lot of running backs on buys this week, and we have a lot of running backs injured right now. So the number one guy I'm taking a look at this position this week is J.D. McKissic from Detroit, only 50% owned. I talked about him quite a bit this past week. He didn't play too bad. I mean, he definitely didn't have nearly as much upside this past week against Chicago as I thought he might. Again, he still didn't play that bad, and quite honestly, on this team, he is the best running back that they have right now. Ty Johnson, truthers are still out there hoping that he can get going, but he had a concussion. He had to leave the game this past week. Is he going to be ready to go next week? J.D. McKissic is the guy. He's the best athlete they have in the backfield right now. He's the guy that's the most dynamic playmaker in the backfield right now. Now, they could possibly add somebody this week. I'm quite honestly, I'm surprised they didn't add Mike Davis. Had they added Mike Davis, he's a guy that I would have rather jumped on. However, J.D. McKissic is the guy to look at right now. Again, the injury to Ty Johnson, the injury to Matt Stafford as well. Stafford's going to miss a few weeks. They're going to have to rely on the run game a little bit more. Now, the passing game didn't look nearly as bad this week as I thought it was going to, but McKissic is a guy, a lot of check down passes, a lot of things can go to him, and he's made some pretty decent plays. He has at least 5 targets a game since week 6. And Dallas has a huge pass rush. So that's who Detroit's playing this week. They're playing the Dallas Cowboys. As you saw this past week against Minnesota to beat Dallas really took advantage of those quick routes. They used Dalvin Cook a ton in that game. Now, J.D. McKissic is no Dalvin Cook. I get that 100%. However, that was the Minnesota game plan against Dallas. Toss the ball down to Dalvin Cook, let him make some plays, using Kyle Rudolph a little bit there in the red zone, getting rid of the ball fast. That was what Minnesota was doing. And then in the run game, obviously, they ran some different blocking schemes, a couple of tight end sets, which they could do. Detroit could also do as well to try and take advantage of that. And also Minnesota threw a fullback out there quite a bit to really get the run game going. However, it was the passing game, short, quick passes, a lot of looks at Dalvin Cook, some screens, some things like that. That's what the Lions are going to have to do with J.D. McKissic this week to be successful against Detroit. I 100% expect him to be more involved this week than he has been in previous weeks, especially if Ty Johnson is not ready to go this week. But again, keep an eye on it. They might sign somebody. They might bring somebody up from the practice squad. They have Paul Perkins, so maybe they think that's going to be enough. But J.D. McKissic is the running back that I want to grab this week, even over Brian Hill. Brian Hill, 0.3% owned. Barely owned in any fantasy leagues at this point. However, I don't love the matchup. He gets Carolina in week 11. Yes, Devonta Freeman is going to be out for probably 3 or 4 weeks, it sounds like. So if you had Devonta Freeman, you got to get Brian Hill. If you're a Freeman owner, you got to get Brian Hill over McKissic, because if you don't get Hill, who's going to be the starter moving forward for the Atlanta Falcons, and you get McKissic, but then Ty Johnson comes back or they sign somebody, now you've really hurt yourself. So for Devonta Freeman owners, you have to get Brian Hill this week. He is the number one target for you. 20 carries last week, 61 yards, a reception touchdown last week as well. In back-to-back games that he's played, he has a rushing touchdown and a receiving touchdown. So he's found the end zone a couple of times. And again, this is more of an emergency ad. Don't love the matchup. Okay, do not love the matchup for Brian Hill this week. However, you have no other choice. You have to add somebody as a Freeman owner. Now, if you're anybody else, if you're not a Freeman owner, then it's J.D. McKissic. Go after J.D. McKissic. He has much more upside if you're trying to stream him in week 11 than what Brian Hill will have. Now, a couple other guys just to keep in mind. Darius Geis is one. We've mentioned him a couple of times. However, he's more of a dynasty league or a keeper league ad for me right now. You can grab him as a speculative ad if you have room on your bench. If Adrian Peterson were to be injured at any point, that's when Geis becomes more valuable. However, I think they slowly work him back. He is expected to be back, if not this week, very, very soon. But APs look good. He's averaging 5 yards a carry since week 6. So I don't think that the Redskins are going to be in any rush to throw Geis out there. Maybe work him back a little bit, but they want him ready to roll for 2020. That's when they need to be ready for him to roll. But again, anything happens to Adrian Peterson, Geis is going to be your guy. And who knows, maybe as the season wears on, they say, we got to get him a little bit more involved. We got to see what we have. We need to get him comfortable. So he's 100% ready to roll going into next season, not going back out there and saying, okay, now I have to amp it up to 100% in week 1 of next year. With Kalen Ballage, I don't know what to tell you with this guy. He's awful. Ballage is no good. He's a desperation ad only. The only reason that we're considering Ballage this week is because we know he's going to get the volume. I mean, that's it. He's an emergency ad. If you play in a really deep league, if you play in a league with 14, 16 teams, even at that point, I don't really think I'm going to add him. However, slim pickings for running backs this week. Ballage is a guy that we know is going to get the ball. He had 20 carries last week. So they're going to feed him the ball, but it's Buffalo. It's Buffalo. Even if you pick him up this week, you're probably not going to start him. If you grab him, it's just kind of, again, is an emergency, someone to put on your bench and have. And just if you have an injury, if there's something going on with your team and you just need to put a body out there to get through the week, that's what we're looking at with Ballage. But again, J.D. McKissic is your number one waiver wire ad for running backs this week. He's the guy that's going to help you get through week 11. Brian Hill is a must add for Devontae Freeman owners. Anybody else is pivoting to McKissic. And then Geis and Ballage, speculative ads that we're probably not going to be playing anytime soon anyway. So for wide receivers this week, now I know Darius Slayton's not going to be playing in week 11. However, we got to get him now. Okay, I've been telling you for a few weeks now. This is a guy we got to be keeping an eye on. We got to have him on our bench. We got to put him in our lineup, especially if Shepard is out. And he showed up and he balled out this past week. This is his second game this season with multiple touchdowns. With no Shepard, he has slipped into his starting role. So he's starting on the outside now, and he's the perfect complement skill-wise to the rest of the players on this team. His biggest game yet on Sunday, 10 receptions on 14 targets, 121 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's on a bye, but again, if you don't grab him this week, you're probably not going to be getting him anytime soon. He's the perfect complement. Again, you've got Golden Tate and you've got Saquon Barkley. Those are the guys. They're going to catch a lot of balls underneath, over the middle of the field, things like that. With Evan Ingram, when he's healthy, he's a guy that's not really... Slayton's the stretch the field guy, but when you have to commit so many resources to the box to stop Barkley, except for this past week when he has 1 yard on 13 rushes, who would have saw that coming? And we also need to keep an eye on that injury. But when they're healthy, again, you have to keep an eye on the backfield for Barkley running the football and catching the football. Golden Tate does a lot of things over the middle of the field, from the slot, quick routes, things like that. When you have to commit that many resources to the box in that part of the field, Slayton can easily slip by a couple of times a game. Not only that, but he ran some really nice routes on Sunday as well. He's looking like a more complete wide receiver every single week. This is the guy that looks better and better. I did a show in the preseason about deep roster stashes, deep breakout guys, and Slayton was one of those guys. I really liked him in the draft and thought that this was a great fit for him. He's showing up right now. So again, you have to get him this week because more than likely that 12% owned is going to jump tremendously next week. For Demaryius Thomas, only 4% owned, but at this point it looks like Robbie Anderson is forgotten. Just completely forgotten. Sam Darnold says he's seeing ghosts. Well, he's certainly not seeing Robbie Anderson, that's for sure, because Demaryius Thomas has looked like a much better play recently than what Anderson has. And of course, Crowder continues to ball out as well. He's averaging 6.5 targets per game since week 5. And Darnold is tough to trust. But clearly he's locked on to Thomas and Crowder. Those are his main 2 targets right now. He gets Washington in week 11. It's a pretty decent matchup. He might end up seeing Josh Norman. We'll have to see. But honestly, again, if you're looking for a guy to play that's going to get some looks and get some targets, it's going to be Demaryius Thomas. Devontae Parker coming in right below him. Don't love his matchup this week either. Again, getting the Buffalo Bills. Don't really love that matchup. But Devontae Parker right now is outscoring Juju Smith-Schuster, which is the way we all wrote it up to begin the season, right? Devontae Fantasy Bigfoot Parker, another decent game this past week. He's a guy that is a touchdown threat. So again, if you play like in a standard league, Parker might not be a bad ad if you're just looking for someone to get you a touchdown. And then Cole Beasley is a PPR ad. He continues to be the number 2 target for the Buffalo Bills. Again, going against Miami, he can end up having a pretty decent game. So if you're in a PPR league and you're looking for a flex play, a wide receiver 3, then Cole Beasley is the guy to go with. Or Darius Slayton is my number 1 waiver wire pickup for wide receivers this week because we definitely need to get him on our roster, especially if Shepard ends up missing the rest of the season. He's not looking good to return it anytime soon right now, according to last reports. That could change at any point in time, but we just have to keep an eye on it. Slayton is the guy to own going forward. Headliner Nation, I love you. I really appreciate the nickname that you've given me this season, Tight End Whisperer, number 1 overall in Fantasy Pros rankings for tight ends. However, this has been a disaster this year. to say that I'm number 1 overall and guiding through a position that has had people who have performed awfully that we thought were going to be good at the end of the season, a position with a ton of injuries right now. I mean, I'm super proud of that because it's been awful to try and navigate. So if you're one of the owners that are affected by tight ends right now and you're just looking for anybody to get you through week 11, There's really not a ton out there that you can trust right now. Number one, Darren Fells, 26% owned. He's currently the tight end 8. That's probably going to be my number one choice this week for tight ends. For guys that are under 50% owned, he's going to be my number one choice. Deshaun Watson's really locked into the tight end position right now. We thought Kiki QT was going to make a decent impact this season. Obviously, with the injuries that they've had at the wide receiver position, Will Fuller going down again. For some reason or another, Fells has become a much needed weapon for Deshaun Watson. And coming into the season, I didn't see that coming. A little bit of a rejuvenated part to his career here. He's looking really good this season. He's a touchdown threat every single week. So he's going to be the number one guy because, I mean, if you're just looking for points, more than likely he's going to get you at least a few with a good opportunity to get into the end zone. With that being said, there are potential higher upside options as well. But again, the next 3 guys, I don't love them. Noah Fant, 8% owned. He's only had one good game, though. I mentioned it last week. A lot of people had asked me about Noah Fant. What about him? I told you to stay away from him. 3, 115, and 1. Really great week. But my disclaimer there last week was, if Noah Fant has a big game because Brandon Allen locks into him and the rookie quarterback goes to Noah Fant, then at that point we need to pay attention. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So now we need to pay attention because if Fant is going to become a trusted target now for Allen, definitely need to be keeping an eye on that because we can play him moving forward. So a decent upside play. But again, are we going to get the same thing we got last week? Fells has been more consistent and proven this year. We're coming off one big game for Fant. Now on the complete opposite side of trust is OJ Howard. I had him as a start this week. I told you all I had him as my tight end 6 this week. He ended up having a good game, which against Arizona anybody should. But can you trust him moving forward? He's risky. He's risky. 44% owned. But if you're looking for an upside play, it's OJ Howard. The one thing that concerns me though is Ronald Jones. His involvement in the passing game could really limit OJ Howard, especially when they're playing against teams that are better against the tight end than what Arizona is. So again, a speculative ad to bring him back, potentially play him, but it's super risky. Same thing for Kyle Rudolph. Kyle Rudolph at 35% owned, 2 touchdowns, and at one point he had 2 receptions for 2 yards and 2 touchdowns, and that was it. And when I say that is it, that's not bad because if he gets you 2 touchdowns, he's more than returned value if anybody started him last week. But the thing here with Kyle Rudolph, the only way you play Kyle Rudolph is if Adam Thielen is out. But Adam Thielen is going to try and make his way back before the bye week. I would not be surprised because of where Minnesota currently stands with their record if they just hold Thielen out another week, let him rest this week, get through the bye, come back after that, refreshed, ready to go, hopefully completely healed up, then move forward with him. So Kyle Rudolph is a decent streaming option this week because we're going to hold Adam Thielen out. If the Minnesota Vikings are smart with it, they just hold him out this next week. They go ahead and they put him off to the side for right now until we get through the bye. Let him heal up. Let him get healthy. If that's the case, then Kyle Rudolph is a target that we absolutely need to take a look at. But Kyle Rudolph, I'm not using a top waiver priority on him. I'm not using a top waiver priority on any of these guys. Use a low waiver priority or wait for waivers to run and then just grab the best option that's left. It's tough to find a defense to stream this week as well, so if you're trying to stream a defense, it's not great pickings. The New York Jets at only 21% owned are the team that I'm looking at streaming this week because of Dwayne Haskins being named the starter going forward for the Washington Redskins. He's got 4 interceptions in 3 games. Needless to say, last week against Buffalo, he didn't turn the ball over at all. However, he's not been completing a ton of passes. He looks a little bit, I don't want to say scared in the pocket, but spooked. He doesn't really get his feet set. He doesn't set up in the pocket. And that could end up being an issue this week against the New York Jets. We'll wait and see. But the turnovers are the key. That's where we're going to get. They might give up some points. They might give up some yards, but they got to get the turnovers. If they get the turnovers, then they're a decent streaming option. But that's what's got to happen. Dallas Cowboys, they're also a team that I'm taking a look at. Dallas and Jacksonville, they're over 50% owned. Again, there are not a ton of great streaming options this week for teams that are less than 50% owned. Dallas, I'll take against Detroit. Obviously, with Driscoll, the backup, playing right now, and no Matthew Stafford, they have a really good pass rush. The Lions' offensive line hasn't been as great as they had hoped this season. So, again, that's a pass rush. They could get you a few sacks, they get you a couple turnovers, maybe a fumble. They could have the turnover game going this week. Again, that's basically the same thing we're saying about the Jets. And for Jacksonville, this is only if Hoyer starts. If for some reason Jacoby Brissett is in this week and doesn't sit again, then we're not going to go with Jacksonville. But if Hoyer has to start again this week, then we'll throw them out there if you're looking for someone to stream, because of how bad Hoyer did last week against Miami, of all people. So again, not a ton of great options on the defensive end of the ball this week, but the New York Jets will be number one, especially for teams that are lowly owned and that you could grab basically after waivers run and just pick them up later. There you have it, Headliner Nation. Like I said, not a ton of great options this week. And we've had that a couple of times this year with the waiver wire. There's other guys that you could end up taking a look at as well. Like Jonnu Smith. He is still under 50% owned for tight ends, but he's on a bye this week. I really want to own him the rest of the season. If you don't need a tight end this week, then he's a guy that maybe you invest in. And Andy Isabella from the Arizona Cardinals. He's a guy, he's been a big play guy recently. He's looking to get a little bit more involved. We're definitely taking a look at him as well. So there's some other guys as well, but if we got to get through this week because of injuries or things, we got to really focus on guys who are playing this week. Outside of Darius Slayton, all these guys I'm talking about are guys that you could grab and potentially try to play this week. Some of them a lot better than others. Some of them could be a total disaster. But again, that's where we're at this point of the season. So again, there's some other names out there as well. Smith, Isabella, two of them that I'm still continuing to look at. However, for this week, these are the guys that you want to keep your eye on. Headliner Nation, don't forget the Headliner Nation Butt Tattoo Challenge. That's what I'm calling it now. Support us on Patreon. 10,000 Patreon supporters by the end of the year. I'm tattooing Tight End Whisperer on my right butt cheek, because that's what we do here. That's how committed we are, Headliner Nation. Hit the like button. Turn on the bell notifications. More importantly, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Become a part of Headliner Nation today. Have a great one, ladies and gentlemen. I'll catch you on the next episode when we talk start and sit for quarterbacks and tight ends. I'll see you then. Take it easy.